Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back to a time when marble palaces shimmered in the desert sun, where peacocks strutted through tiled courtyards, and most importantly, where the floors of royal bathrooms somehow stayed mysteriously wet, even when it hadn't rained for weeks. You're in the Abbasid era now, and what you're about to uncover is that somehow, 200 years ago, people had working indoor plumbing that could humble many 19th century European households. But don't get too excited. You probably wouldn't survive a single day here. Between the scalding bath water, the baked bread that doubles as dinnerware, and the wildly different etiquette around, say, personal space, it's not exactly Airbnb friendly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere interesting, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out into the courtyard of a sprawling desert palace somewhere near modern-day Iraq. It's the 9th century, and the Abbasid Caliphate is flexing hard. Wealth flows in from east and west. Marble is cheap, and so are engineers. You pass a fountain that doesn't just burble, it breathes. Like it knows it's part of a grand design. The Caliph himself. He's inside, possibly in a robe that costs more than a house, leafing through texts on geometry, theology, and yes, water flow mechanics. Because in this golden age of Islamic civilization, being a nerd about plumbing was kind of a flex. Now, here's the thing. When we think advanced ancient civilizations, we picture Rome, maybe Greece, but the Abbasids. They were quietly building water systems that would shame 13th century London's throw-it-out-the-window technique. You walk past a low stone bench, and a cat darts from underneath, probably looking for a cooler patch of tile. The floor here slightly sloped. Not that you'd notice unless you were walking it barefoot like this. That slope isn't accidental. It's part of a system designed to carry water away. Gently and silently, you glance down and spot a thin copper grate. Decorative but functional. It leads to an underground tunnel barely wider than your shoulders. Historians still argue whether this network was purely for palace luxury, or if it extended into the middle-class homes of Baghdad. The answer, likely, is both, and neither. Welcome to the delightfully slippery world of Abbasid infrastructure records. But here's what we do know: the palaces had bathhouses. Not just a place to rinse off sweat and date syrup, but communal centers where architects designed with acoustics in mind. Water would fall, not splash. It would echo, not trickle. Because silence was the luxury of the elite. And beneath those bathhouses, a spiderweb of tunnels carved through clay, lined with ceramic, sometimes glazed, often angled just enough to use gravity like a butler. Waste it didn't just sit there. It moved slowly, methodically, out of sight and out of smell. Here's the kicker. Much of this predates Europe's reintroduction of the flush toilet by centuries. The Romans, sure, had their aqueducts. But after the empire fell, so did the plumbing. By the time Charlemagne was scratching his beard in a drafty Frankish hall, Abbasid engineers were calculating flow rates with ink and papyrus. Oh, and while we're here, can we talk about the smell? Because it wasn't just about getting rid of water or waste. Abbasids believed deeply in cleanliness, both spiritual and practical. You'll find perfumed oils used not just on skin, but near latrines. Some homes even had bowls of rose water placed next to toilet chambers to mask any lingering realities. One of the oldest surviving palace bathrooms includes what appears to be a perfume shelf. Yes, a shelf. In the bathroom. For your frankincense cubes and musk sachets. You know, priorities. And let's not forget the cooling effect. In these desert climates, strategically placed water channels beneath the stone kept certain rooms deliciously cool even during peak sun. A medieval air conditioner, courtesy of engineering and, well, probably dozens of anonymous workers you'll never read about. As you continue down the corridor, your foot brushes against a groove in the floor, barely noticeable. But if you had water and patience, you'd see it flow precisely to a corner drain. That drain would snake through a carefully graded slope, emptying into a garden or a separate collection basin. Reuse was common. Water didn't get one job, it got three. Wash your hands, water the garden, clean the stone. The modern myth that no one had plumbing until the Enlightenment should honestly be flushed, because here, in this palace tucked among the palms and date groves, the floors literally hum with quiet innovation. One last image before we move on. A child skipping across the tile, holding a clay cup under a brass spout shaped like a lion's head. He turns it. A trickle of fresh water spills out, and the lion gurgles. You'd assume it's magic, but no, it's a sealed pipe system fed from an underground cistern, pressurized naturally through elevation. And that's just the entrance. You follow the sound of moving water out into the streets of Baghdad, but this isn't the dusty camel swarm chaos your imagination might have conjured. No, this is 9th century Baghdad, capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, and a city so carefully engineered. It makes your local suburb look like a half-finished Lego set. The air here smells of clay and cardamom, and under your sandals, you feel something faint, a gentle tremble. It's the low pulse of water flowing beneath your feet. Yes, beneath, because the Abbasids didn't just build a city, they built it with water. Baghdad was a masterpiece of intentional design, wrapped in concentric circles, and crossed with canals and aqueducts that fed both gardens and homes. You turn a corner and hear the slosh of a bucket being lowered into a stone well. But don't let that fool you, this isn't the main water source. That bucket is just for topping off a rooftop cistern. The real action is underfoot a system of clay pipes and brick-lined tunnels, some less than a meter high, running beneath the city like a watery nervous system. Mainstream history books tend to skip this part. You'll get the House of Wisdom. Sure, maybe a quick note about algebra, but nobody tells you that those scholars were doing their calculations in buildings where the toilets actually flushed. That's right, flushed. Not with a chrome handle and a pressurized tank, but with simple gravity and clever design. And get this, the city's public fountains weren't just pretty. They were part of the pressure release system for the broader hydraulic grid. Too much rainwater. Let it spill artistically into a basin shaped like a blooming lotus. Too little water. Reroute it quietly from another canal. Urban design disguised as poetry. Now, you duck into a quieter alley, where the walls are higher and the shadows deeper. Here, in one of the more modest neighborhoods, a boy uses a copper ladle to rinse his hands after playing with a mud brick toy. His family's home doesn't have palace pipes, but it does connect to a local distribution pipe, a baked clay cylinder about as wide as your wrist, tucked beneath the stone floor. Historians still argue whether Baghdad's plumbing was citywide or concentrated in elite neighborhoods. It's a fuzzy question, mostly because the infrastructure didn't survive the Mongols. But we have blueprints, fragments, accounts from travelers, and hints in the language itself. Words for flushing, channeling, and drainage pop up in the unlikeliest poetry collections. You pause by a curved wall where a small faucet juts from a lion-shaped tile. A man fills a jar for evening tea. He doesn't question where it comes from. Just above you is a rooftop reservoir, fed by a neighborhood water tower that gets topped off weekly from a nearby aqueduct. That aqueduct, one of several that lace the outskirts of the city, drawing water from the Tigris and routing it into Baghdad's guts. And these aren't the sad wooden pipes of 17th century London. These are ceramic, interlocked, and gently sloped. Many were sealed with pitch or wrapped in linen to prevent leakage. and while they weren't perfect, leaks happened. Sediment-built-up engineers maintained them with a regularity that would make any modern utility worker weep. There's even a rumor, or maybe just a very persistent historical footnote, that one district had a system of rotating flow, designed so each household received fresh water for an hour each day, enough to fill storage jugs, rinse linens, and water a rooftop basil patch. Like a plumbing lottery, as you walk, a breeze shifts, and you catch the scent of river water, muddy, but clean. It's a reminder that, unlike some later European cities, Baghdad didn't dump its sewage where it drank. Wastewater was routed away from the main canals, often to garden plots or filtered basins. No raw sewage in the Tigris, thank you very much. And it gets quirkier, some wealthier families reportedly used fish tanks. Yes, literal indoor pools of decorative fish as natural waste filtration systems. The fish ate organic debris, the water circulated downward, and the process repeated. A biological toilet with fins. Imagine trying to patent that today. You pass a square where an elderly man sits reading under a fig tree. Behind him, a low wall conceals a water channel, just wide enough for a child to crawl through. That channel, part of a qanat system, stretches for miles underground. Cool, dark, and masterfully sloped. These qanats weren't invented by the Abbasids, but they perfected their integration into urban planning. Want water pressure in a third-floor kitchen? Elevate the cistern and connect it to a qanat-fed pipe. Problem solved. No pump necessary. And all of this, every pipe, every brick, every gravity-fed marvel was built with a calm, mathematical elegance. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it worked. Europe wouldn't catch up for centuries. When monks in medieval France were still using chamber pots and flinging their contents out the window like it was an Olympic sport. Baghdad was quietly redirecting waste through sloped tunnels and using reed mats to filter gray water. And while we're here, let's appreciate the sheer boldness of it all. This wasn't just engineering. It was philosophy. The Abbasids saw water as divine. Flowing water wasn't just a convenience, it was a blessing. A sacred thing. You didn't waste it. You respected it. You guided it gently, like a guest who had traveled far. So the next time someone tells you medieval cities were dirty, you can nod politely. And then remind them that in 9th century Baghdad, water was already whispering through walls. You're standing in the entrance of a bathhouse now, not the palace ones reserved for royals, but a public hammam, tiled with geometric patterns and lit by filtered sunlight beaming through small circular windows in the domed ceiling. The air is thick with steam and the faint scent of eucalyptus, and your bare feet slap softly against warm, polished stone. And you're not here alone. This is Baghdad during the height of the Abbasid Caliphate. And the hammam is the great equalizer. Merchants, scholars, street poets, even off-duty guards, they all cycle through these steamy sanctuaries. A man next to you is quoting Galen while scrubbing his elbows. Another one 2 benches down is reciting lines from the Quran. Eyes closed, letting the steam open both his pores and his mind. Because in the Abbasid world, cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness, it was also parked right next to intellectual enlightenment. Here's the thing. Nobody told you in history class hammams weren't just for washing bodies. They were cultural hubs, debate halls, Tinder, coffee shop, and therapist's office, all rolled into one. And they only existed in this form because indoor water infrastructure allowed them to. You run your hand along a wall that radiates gentle heat. Behind it is a hypocaust system, a kind of ancient central heating where wood-fired furnaces push warm air beneath the floors and into hollow clay columns built inside the walls. The Romans might have used this centuries earlier, but the Abbasids, they optimized it. added thermostatic flow, slanted the tiles for better cleaning, used scented wood when possible, because why sweat in silence when you can sweat in style? Historians still argue whether these refinements were imported from Byzantine traditions or developed independently. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But the Abbasids left their own mark: gravity-powered water tanks that kept hot and cold streams separate, small copper spigots embedded directly into the walls, and meticulously layered floors to handle heat without cracking. You move deeper into the hammam, where a younger man is ladling water over his head from a marble basin. But the water doesn't just sit there, it drains almost as fast as it arrives, disappearing through nearly invisible channels cut into the floor. These weren't afterthoughts, they were part of the original design, ensuring hygiene and keeping things from turning into a puddle party. And here's your quirky trivia nugget for the night. Some hammams were staffed by water sommeliers. Not an official title, of course, but these attendants knew the difference between well water, river-fed aqueducts, and rainwater collected in rooftop cisterns. Want the mineral-rich stuff for exfoliating? They had a jar for that. Prefer the soft rainwater for rinsing your hair? They'd bring it over with a ladle and a wink. Some even claim that certain caliphs could identify which canal their bathwater had come from, based purely on taste and temperature. Was that just ego? Probably. But the fact they could taste the difference means the system was functioning with a level of precision that seems absurdly advanced for its time. And it wasn't all bathrobes and philosophical banter. Behind the scenes were workers, mostly slaves and lower caste laborers hauling wood, checking drain slopes, maintaining the hippocaust, and ensuring the water didn't backflow into, well, the social areas. They rarely get mentioned in the poetry or palace memoirs, but without them you'd be knee-deep in soggy towels and lukewarm sludge. It's easy to romanticize this place now. Standing in the haze, listening to the muffled splash of water and the soft buzz of conversation. But this was a technological marvel hidden beneath marble and mosaic. Pipes ran upward from underground cisterns, strategically pressurized by gravity. Certain basins had dual nozzles, one hot, one cold long, before Europe figured out why scalding your hands isn't ideal hygiene. And it gets even better. Some hammams had small ceiling vents designed to let steam out at specific angles, avoiding condensation drips. Nobody likes a rogue droplet landing in their eye during philosophical musings, after all. You move toward the drying chamber now, where bathers relax under tall arched windows, sipping mint tea and chatting about the latest lecture at the House of Wisdom. One man is drying his feet while arguing that Aristotle had it wrong about spontaneous generation. Another laughs, countering with a reference to Al-Kindi. Neither is wearing pants. It's that kind of place. But the conversation isn't idle. Here, ideas move like water quietly, persistently, and always toward balance. These baths were a breeding ground for intellectual and spiritual hygiene, a place where scholars refreshed their minds as well as their skin. Some even claim treaties were negotiated in hammams, that poetry was composed between steams, and that at least one citywide canal reform was sketched into the steam-fogged tiles of a bathhouse wall. And maybe, just maybe, that's the quiet genius of Abbasid plumbing. It wasn't loud or ostentatious. It wasn't there to impress. It was there to enable things. Reflection, connection, discovery. So the next time you run a bath or rinse your hands without a second thought, remember this level of comfort once took a whole civilization to perfect. And in Baghdad, 1,000 years ago, someone already had it figured out sitting in a tiled room, wrapped in steam, rinsing off the dust of another very thoughtful day. You shuffle into a dim corner of a well-appointed Baghdad home, following the scent of jasmine, sandalwood, and, oddly, lavender. There's a small room here, modestly sized, Perhaps just large enough to turn around in, but it has something you don't expect: a toilet. Not a hole in the ground. Not a bucket tucked in a closet. A toilet built into the corner, carved into smooth limestone, with a gently curved seat, and behind it, a small decorative basin trickling water into a dark recess. You blink, then sniff. Wait, does this smell good? It does. Somehow, this is a pleasant experience. And you're about to learn why. In the Abbasid era, the humble toilet was treated with an almost reverent attention to detail. It wasn't just a practical necessity, it was an extension of cleanliness, aesthetics, and yes, even spirituality. And it certainly didn't reek of medieval stereotypes. The air here is lightly perfumed. Why? Because built into the stone wall beside the commode is a shallow niche, a cubby for incense or a small ceramic burner. A thin plume of sweet smoke curls upward, keeping the air fragrant. This wasn't unusual. In fact, it was common in wealthier homes. You'd find cinnamon, myrrh, sandalwood, even how gently masking the darker realities of bodily function. And the water basin. That's not for decoration. It's part of the flush system. You wouldn't flush like modern toilets. Of course, no porcelain lever, no screaming pipes. Instead, a servant, or more discreetly, a jug from a nearby niche would release clean water into the bowl, helping rinse waste into a sloped channel below the floor. Gravity does the rest, whisking it away into a subterranean tunnel. No swirling vortex, just a soft, purposeful gurgle. Historians still argue whether this rinse system was widespread or reserved for the upper class. Archaeological evidence is scattered, but travelers' accounts from both Muslim and non-Muslim sources mention fragrant privies and cleansing waters with surprising frequency. The silence in these mentions is loud. They were so normal, people barely thought to describe how they worked. Now, here's your quirky twist for the night in at least one palace. Records mention a scent steward, a person whose entire job was to prepare, manage, and rotate the fragrances used in various rooms, including the toilets. Imagine explaining that at a dinner party. You turn and notice a small decorative jar tucked into the corner, filled with dried rose petals. Another has crushed clove. These weren't just for fragrance, they were believed to repel pests, purify air, and in some cases protect the soul from spiritual impurities associated with waste. Remember, this is a culture where ritual cleanliness before prayer is essential. Ablution wasn't a chore, it was a sacred rhythm. So having a latrine that smelled like a spice market that wasn't luxury, that was alignment with divine order. But we're not done. Some latrines were designed to buffer noise. Yes, even back then, nobody wanted the awkward echo of business being conducted. Certain walls were thickened, corners rounded, and basins designed to muffle. Acoustics. Abbasid plumbing. Ladies and gentlemen solving social anxiety before microphones even existed. And there's one last surprise. Look down again. Notice how the slope of the floor subtly guides water away. Not just from the bowl, but from your feet. There's a gentle curve, too soft to trip over, but smart enough to keep you dry. At the very threshold of the room, there's even a groove, a tiny trench that helps contain any rebellious droplets. These design choices weren't aesthetic flourishes. They were practical engineering solutions that would take Europe another 600 years to consider. Meanwhile, across the continent, castles in medieval France and England were still relying on garderobes, essentially holes, that dumped waste directly down the outer wall into moats or ditches. Charming, right? And let's not even discuss the chamber pot over the head incidents. But here in Baghdad, waste was carried away discreetly, cleanly, and without making a scene. You exit the room, stepping back into a cool hallway tiled with mosaics of turquoise and ivory. The walls are etched with calligraphy verses about purity, water, and gratitude. Because even the architecture whispers of values, honor and cleanliness, joy and refinement, peace and practicality. And it wasn't just about water leaving. In many homes, water entered through private channels fed by local canals or cisterns. Buckets and pitchers, yes, but also clay pipes that climbed quietly up walls, delivering cool, fresh water to sinks or basins in kitchens and washrooms. These vertical pipes often passed through hollowed bricks, keeping them insulated from the desert heat, and some were even filtered filled with gravel or sand or layers of fine cloth to soften the taste and clean the runoff. We forget. Sometimes that luxury in the past wasn't about abundance. It was about control. Having water when you wanted it, having privacy when you needed it, and being able to relieve yourself without alerting the entire household. That was wealth. That was freedom. So next time you light a candle in your bathroom or spray a little air freshener before guests arrive, tip your hat to the Abbasids. They were scenting latrines with frankincense before your ancestors even figured out that outhouses attract bears. Section 5. You're now in the back quarters of a wealthy merchant's home, a place so carefully built that even the dust seems organized. It's quiet, save for the occasional murmur from the street beyond the shuttered windows. But you're not here for tea or textiles. No, tonight you're following a mystery. How did the Abbasids make waste vanish so efficiently? So discreetly. It nearly erased itself from the record. You glance at a tiled floor near the pantry, oddly pristine despite the traffic. You crouch, tap, hollow. Something is beneath. And when you gently pry open a slim stone panel, you see at one of the Abbasid world's best-kept secrets a sloped clay duct, just wide enough for a small animal to crawl through, angled to disappear beneath the home and connect to somewhere else. Welcome to the mysterious case of the disappearing waste. While European cities were still throwing chamber pot contents into the street with all the grace of a drunken discus thrower, the Abbasids were routing their household waste into subterranean tunnels that led to decanting pits, dry fields, or even brace yourself public composting zones. Composting in the 9th century. Take that, your neighborhood's 3-bin recycling setup. Here's how it worked. A slightly elevated cistern within the house stored clean water, often filled via rooftop rain collection or canal buckets. When needed, this water could be used to rinse waste through angled pipes running under the home. Gravity did most of the work, but clever engineering made sure the angle of decline kept things flowing, no modern suction required. Historians still argue whether every neighborhood had access to these channels, or whether city planners deliberately zoned the richer districts with better drainage. The answer is probably yes, and also probably no. Records are patchy, but the presence of these systems in both homes and public buildings suggests a deeper citywide understanding of water management. And there's a fringe theory, just strange enough to be true, that some households trained dogs to bark when a blockage occurred in the tunnel system. Not a fact you'll find in every textbook, but several travel accounts reference animals responding to poor smells in curious ways. Anyway, back to the tunnel. This pipe doesn't go straight. It curves a gentle snake of fired clay, sealed at the joints with resin or lime mortar. It descends in soft spirals, slowly funneling the contents of daily life wastewater, gray water, and the less pleasant bits out of sight and smell. And guess what? It worked. Homes stayed fresher, insects stayed away, and families didn't have to carry sloshing buckets of you-don't-want-to-know through their own kitchens. You follow the duct outside into a narrow alley where the waste channels from multiple homes converge into a brick-lined tunnel. These weren't open sewers, they were sealed, layered, sometimes even vented with tiny chimney-like shafts. And they weren't just dumping grounds, they were conduits. The waste might end up in a field, reused as fertilizer, or it might flow to one of the digestion pits on the outskirts of town. where it was processed by time, temperature, and maybe a few nosy goats. Some accounts describe these pits being cleaned seasonally by city workers, likely unpaid, unsung, and absolutely heroic. If you're looking for a statue to commission, start with those guys. And what's even more impressive, the Abbasids hid all this engineering. There's no signpost, no clanging lids, no sulfurous stench. Just a cool tile, a quiet slope, and a whisper of flow. You return inside, still barefoot, and notice something subtle every sink, every wash basin. Every toilet is positioned along interior walls, facing downhill toward the Tigris, toward the main canals, toward the city's hydraulic heart. Coincidence? Not a chance. The whole thing was mapped. Now, let's zoom out. Baghdad wasn't just lucky, it was planned. Built from scratch by Khalif al-Mansur in 762 CE, the city was designed as a circular marvel, its radial roads and water lines arranged with obsessive precision. The Caliph's architects understood one thing very well: control the water. And you control everything else. Comfort, hygiene, health, even political loyalty, because who doesn't love a ruler who keeps your neighborhood from smelling like despair? The Abbasids didn't just engineer for elegance, they engineered for invisibility. You never saw the system. You didn't hear it. It simply worked. And that leads to a particularly weird legacy problem. So much of it disappeared without a trace. Later invaders, time, and disuse swallowed the tunnels. When archaeologists tried to trace them, they often found partial segments, beautiful curves of glazed pipe, just ending. As if the builders had slipped into another dimension. There's even one home documented in a 13th century traveler's notes, where the owner claimed he never smelled his own latrine. A humble brag? Sure, but also a testament to how proud people were of this disappearing act. And it's not just about waste, it's about the mindset. A culture that believed cleanliness was spiritual. That engineering should be felt but not flaunted. That waste should move silently, invisibly, leaving no trace. So the next time you flush a toilet and don't think twice, imagine a world where doing so required slope calculations, fired clay, and a citywide network of tunnels all built by hand just to make sure your house didn't smell like a compost heap in July. In 9th century Baghdad, they already had it handled. You're now standing in the cool shadows beneath the bustling streets of Baghdad. It's quiet down here, eerily so. The city hums above, unaware, but below. This is the real heartbeat of Abbasid infrastructure. Tunnels stretch in every direction, some high enough to crouch through, others barely the width of your arm. Clay, brick, stone all carved, fitted, sealed. Not haphazardly, but with care, precision. And yet, the names of the people who built all of this, nearly all of them, are lost. Tonight, you're meeting the silent workforce, the slave engineers, the laborers, the artisans whose sweat and know-how kept the Golden Age flowing literally. Don't be fooled by the Golden Age label. Yes, Baghdad glistened with learning and luxury, but beneath that golden sheen was a deeply stratified society. Enslaved people captured in wars, inherited, or traded were often the ones digging the very tunnels that made the city habitable. Not the scholars, not the caliphs, the nameless thousands who carried bricks on their backs. Hands raw from lime mortar. You press your palm to the wall, it's cool, damp, and slightly curved. That curve? It wasn't a happy accident. That was geometry at work, shaped with wooden molds and lined with waterproof plaster. To get it right required an understanding of flow resistance and water weight. These people weren't just digging ditches, they were building systems. Historians still argue whether the more advanced layouts, the multi-chambered reservoirs, the pressure equalizing sluices were designed by court engineers, or figured out by laborers through sheer trial and error. But walk far enough through these tunnels, and you'll start to suspect whoever built this knew. One of the more remarkable quirks down here: brick stamps. Some tunnel bricks are etched with faint symbols loops, birds, or stylized initials. They weren't decorative. These were marks of labor crews, likely used to track work teams or tally quotas. A whisper of identity from workers who otherwise vanish from the history books. And these weren't just slaves. Many were skilled, trained in masonry, hydraulics, even geometry. The Abbasid elite may have directed the projects, but it was the enslaved classes who refined the curves, adjusted the slopes, and mixed the right ratios of lime and ash to make waterproof grout. A story goes that one caliph, touring a newly completed bathhouse, dropped a ring down a drain. Furious, he demanded the drain be dug up and the ring returned. The tunnel crew obliged, and redesigned the drainage system afterward to include a removable silt trap. Not because they feared punishment, but because function mattered. They turned a tantrum into innovation. And here's something the textbooks often forget. This underground world was dangerous. Collapses weren't rare. Toxic gases from decomposing waste sometimes built up in sealed segments. Laborers had to test tunnels with oil lamps if the flame flickered out. Oxygen was low. If it flared violently, methane. Either way, not ideal for a Tuesday shift. To mitigate this, vents were added. Vertical shafts led up to the surface, disguised as decorative columns or garden features. Some say these vents doubled as secret listening posts or escape hatches romantic. Sure, but most likely they just let fresh air in and smells out. Still, you can't shake the feeling that these tunnels weren't just built. They were inhabited. Someone knew them. Knew where water pooled, where lime plaster needed patching, where rats might sneak in and ruin everything. There was an intimacy here, like a janitor knowing every creaky stair and loose tile in an old school. And this brings us to the strange duality of Abbasid engineering on the surface. It was art. Below, it was labor. Above, you had scholars writing treatises on water flow. Below, you had men crawling through filth to make sure it actually flowed. There's one record of a tunnel engineer still enslaved being rewarded with partial freedom after solving a leak that had plagued a government bathhouse for weeks. His name isn't recorded. Just a note that he was allowed to keep earnings on festival days. Generous by medieval standards. Tragic by modern ones. But let's pause on that leak. It had appeared near the caliph's quarters quiet at first, then suspicious. The odor was concerning. Multiple teams failed to locate it. Finally, this unnamed laborer traced it to a joint in a vaulted drain where condensation had pooled, softened the mortar, and warped the angle. He realigned the pipe, resealed the gap, and reinforced the wall. Quietly, efficiently, and then vanished back into the network of nameless workers. If that's not engineering genius, what is? Some modern engineers have studied these systems and expressed bafflement at their longevity. Many lasted centuries without replacement. Why? Because they were overbuilt. Double-sealed joints. Redundant drains. Some even say the curves mimic natural stream beds to prevent clogs. That's not improvisation, that's applied science. And yet, the documents are silent about the builders. We don't have manuals written by them. No journals. Just fingerprints left in clay. Boot marks near tunnel mouths. The occasional broken tool embedded in mortar. Ghosts in the infrastructure. As you walk back toward the surface, the echoes change. The silence below gives way to muffled life above. But you don't forget this place, and you can't. Because under every golden dome and polished mosaic, there's this invisible world built by hands you'll never shake. but whose work you feel every time water flows without effort. They may have been nameless, but they made the city breathe. You're back above ground now, strolling along a sunlit colonnade in the heart of Baghdad's round city. The stone underfoot is warm, the breeze carries a hint of river mist, and the distant call to prayer echoes through the domes. But tonight, you're heading somewhere a little more niche. Past the guards, past the scholars, through a carved doorway lined with intricate Kufic script, right into the private study of Caliph al-Mansur. Now, to be clear, you're not here to witness statecraft, or theology, or even poetry, although all of that is probably happening in the next room. No. This particular chamber is filled with scrolls, diagrams, and of all things ceramic pipe fragments. Because al-Mansur, founder of Baghdad, wasn't just a patron of astronomy and literature, he also had a suspiciously nerdy interest in plumbing. You step around a brass globe and notice a stack of scrolls annotated in the margins. Someone has drawn arrows next to various aqueduct models, adjusted slope angles, and scribbled notes in Arabic and Persian. This is not the work of an absent-minded monarch. This is the work of a ruler who really cared about water pressure. According to court stories, half historical, half gossipy al-Mansur insisted on overseeing the initial design of Baghdad's canal and sewage system himself. He was fascinated by how Roman engineers had piped water into bathhouses. He reportedly kept a collection of foreign hydraulic models and even held private debates with architects over the ideal pipe width for gravity-fed flushes. Imagine the most powerful man in the empire arguing about drain slope gradients after dinner. Historians still argue whether these stories are accurate or exaggerated. Some claim the plumbing obsession was more metaphor than fact, a symbol of his control over every aspect of his capital. Others point to letters between the caliph and engineers that mention, quite casually, pipe flow tests and ceramic linings. Either way, one thing is clear: this wasn't just delegation. It was personal. A cheeky tale survives about the time al-Mansur visited a wealthy noble's newly built villa. Everything was polished, golden, luxurious. But when he stepped into the latrine, he frowned. Too much echo. He knocked on the marble, nodded, and walked out without saying a word. A week later, the entire privy chamber had been rebuilt, with a rounded ceiling acoustics optimized. Because when the caliph disapproves of your bathroom design, you fix it. You lean over one of the workbenches and spot an open scroll detailing an early model of a rooftop cistern, complete with valves, pressure diagrams, and small Arabic notes along the margins that roughly translate to "too steep causes noise." Adjust slope by hand width. One of al-Mansur's chief engineers, a man named Isa ibn Yahya, allegedly developed a method for waterproofing clay joints using heated resin and crushed date pits. Why date pits? Because they expanded slightly in heat and sealed cracks. Genius, right? Well, the caliph thought so too. He had Yahya exempted from military tax for 5 years. And if you're wondering whether al-Mansur's plumbing interests ever crossed into obsession, well, yes. One account claims he once delayed a diplomatic reception because he wanted to inspect a noise complaint in the guest bath. He blamed it on mismatched pipe diameters. Not exactly royal behavior, but undeniably effective. There's something almost charming about it. Amid the intrigue and intellectual ferment of Abbasid rule, here's a ruler more invested in how water moves quietly through a wall than how his name appears in poems. You pause by a window. Outside, a team of workers is adjusting a water wheel by the canal, its large paddles creaking gently in the breeze. That wheel is one of dozens raising water into aqueducts, feeding rooftop tanks, irrigating gardens, and flushing quiet toilets in elegant homes. All of this, somehow, connects back to that initial vision, the round city, designed with concentric zones for government, military, markets, and water, always water, flowing through it all like a silent contract between the ruler and the ruled. I'll bring you water, and you'll build me a civilization. And here's your quirky side note for the night. It's said that when engineers tested a new drainage system at the palace, Al-Mansur himself poured a cup of water into the main intake and timed how long it took to reach the garden spout. When it came out too fast, splashy, noisy, he ordered the slope reduced by half a thumb's width. A real Goldilocks moment for medieval hydraulics. One of his most curious experiments involved using double-chambered pipes to control sound. The theory was that two parallel pipes, when angled properly, could suppress gurgling. Did it work? Mixed results. But the idea was ahead of its time. And more importantly, it meant the Caliphate's leadership took plumbing as seriously as poetry. And here's the final image al-Mansur, in full regalia, seated beside a pool of silent, rippling water. Not a ceremonial fountain, just a still, clean reservoir that fed half the palace. The mirror of calm, a reflection of control. And beneath it all, 1,000 tiny tunnels humming like quiet veins beneath the city's skin. He wasn't just building Baghdad, he was building flow smooth, quiet, intentional, and somehow, maybe even unknowingly, laying the foundations for a plumbing legacy that Europe wouldn't dare replicate for centuries. You find yourself perched now in a quiet courtyard garden, a patch of green tucked behind a wealthy Abbasid home. Birds flit between orange blossoms, and somewhere nearby, you hear the delicate plip-plop of water falling into stone. You follow the sound. At first, it seems like a decorative fountain, perhaps fed by a canal or rain, but then you notice something odd. The water doesn't stay. It flows down, out, away. It's a toilet, but not just any toilet, it's flushable. And it's been here, quietly doing its job, since sometime around the early 800s. Which is wild, because across Europe at that time, the height of toilet luxury was still a wooden bench with a hole in it, perched over a pit and frequently shared by everyone from lords to lice. Here in Baghdad, the Abbasids had figured out a way to harness gravity and clever water redirection to flush waste from their homes, bathhouses, and even public latrines. And they didn't shout about it. They just did it elegantly, quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The system was surprisingly simple. A sloped pipe, a small cistern or water basin, and a series of smooth ceramic segments sealed tightly enough to prevent leaks but loose enough to allow maintenance. Water would be poured or channeled into the bowl area, rinsing away the contents and pushing them down through a gradually sloped pipe, often directed into a neighborhood-wide disposal tunnel or garden compost system. Historians still argue whether this constituted a true flush system by modern standards. Some say no lever, no valve, no deal. Others, more reasonable, point out that the principal waste removed via water flow and slope is functionally identical to modern gravity flush toilets. The Abbasids weren't just early adopters, they were pioneers. And here's your quirky trivia moment. Some ceramic toilet bowls from the Abbasid era were glazed not just for decoration, but for hygiene. Easier to rinse, less likely to absorb smells. Archaeologists have uncovered pieces with swirling blue designs, floral motifs, and on one very cheeky fragment, a small poem about modesty. Bathroom poetry, because when your latrine is this advanced, why not get a little literary? You crouch near the drain and notice something peculiar. It's not straight, it's curved. Why? Because a straight pipe can echo. Sound travels. And remember, we're in a culture that prizes discretion, quiet, and spiritual cleanliness. A curved pipe muffled noise. It also slowed the flow just enough to allow heavier contents to settle where they could be collected later for compost. You reach out and run your fingers along the rim of the bowl. Smooth, cool. Designed with care? A servant walks by with a pitcher of rose water, clearly headed to the privy chamber. He nods politely. This isn't a back alley necessity. This is normal. Expected. You relieve yourself. Then you cleanse thoroughly, respectfully, and probably with something that smells faintly of sandalwood. Compare that to medieval Europe chamber pots under the bed, human waste flung out of upper-story windows with a casual Gardy loo streets that reeked of rot, and riverbanks turned into open sewers. It wouldn't be until the 18th and 19th centuries, a full millennium later, that European cities would attempt sewage systems even approaching the quiet genius of Abbasid plumbing. And it wasn't just for elites. Public bathhouses and communal latrines also made use of gravity-fed waste removal systems. Some had tiled floors with gentle slopes leading to central collection points, rinsed frequently with diverted canal water or manually poured basins. These were cleaned daily by maintenance staff, many of whom understood the systems well enough to diagnose clogs, leaks, or improper slope angles with a glance. We even have records of latrine maintenance manuals brief. To be sure, but detailed enough to mention angle must not exceed half a fist's rise over 3 paces. That's not guesswork. That's plumbing math. In the 9th century, one small, fascinating side note. Certain religious scholars of the time debated whether flushing toilets, even manual ones, were permissible during prayer times. Why? Because the sudden water movement might interrupt ablution rituals or disrupt spiritual focus. A lively scholarly argument over when to flush because flushing existed. And let's not forget the water itself. Most homes used clean water from rooftop cisterns, canal-fed jars, or gravity-pressurized aqueduct spigots. This wasn't just about disposal, it was about purification. One early theologian wrote that to cleanse the body with moving water is to invite stillness into the soul. Poetry, plumbing, and piety. All in one sentence. You stand again, brushing imaginary dust from your robe, and take one last look at the courtyard. The water has trickled to stillness. Somewhere beneath your feet, a pipe carries that water away, joining a quiet system that loops beneath homes, gardens, hammams, and palaces, and it worked. Efficiently. Silently. Without splash, without shame. So the next time someone tells you flushing toilets are a modern marvel, kindly inform them that the Abbasids were already designing elegant waste systems while most of Europe was still trying to invent pants with working fasteners. You follow a thin stream of water, now barely a trickle, as it winds its way from a garden spout down a narrow gutter, slipping under a low threshold into the corner of a modest home. But where it came from, that's the real story tonight. Because this isn't rainwater, and it didn't come from a bucket. It came from the mighty Tigris River via a stunning ballet of elevation, pressure, gravity, and Abbasid plumbing genius. Time to follow a single drop of water on its journey from river to reservoir, to rooftop. Let's start at the edge of the city, where the Tigris rolls by like a slow-moving artery of life. Along its banks, you'll see dozens of Sakiya's water wheels spinning rhythmically in the sun. They creak and groan, lifting clay pots on ropes or chains, each one scooping water from the river below and tipping it into stone channels above. These water wheels weren't new. The technology had existed for centuries, used in Persia, the Levant, even parts of India. But the Abbasids refined the system, designing wheels with interchangeable parts, optimized paddle sizes, and pulley weights that could be recalibrated depending on river speed or sediment buildup. From there, the water enters an aqueduct. Not the grand Roman arches you're picturing, though. Some Abbasid cities had those. 2 but modest, efficient, and deliberate channels lined with clay, brick, or stone, sloping gently into the heart of the city. The whole thing relies on gravity, No pumps, no spells, just a perfect angle. A precise gradient that lets water whisper its way across kilometers of terrain without losing momentum. And here's where things get elegant. Before it even reaches a home, the water often enters a sabal, a public fountain or charitable water station, many of which were endowed by wealthy patrons. These sabals served travelers, animals, the poor, or anyone thirsty enough to stop. It was considered a pious act to build one, and many bore inscriptions like, "In the name of the most merciful," "Drink and be well," "Hydration as a spiritual service." But for household use, the water, diverted into cisterns sunk in storage chambers, often lined with plaster, shaded by trees or tucked beneath buildings to stay cool. Some homes had shared cisterns. Others had private ones, especially if they could afford rooftop tanks. These were essentially medieval water towers, filled via buckets, wheels, or redirected aqueduct spouts, and used to create water pressure for upper-story basins. Historians still argue whether rooftop pressure systems were common or reserved for the elite. But archaeological traces like rooftop piping grooves and broken spouts suggest they were more widespread than previously assumed. Even in middle-class homes may have had at least some pressurized plumbing. And now, back to our little water drop. From the rooftop cistern, it travels down a vertical pipe, ceramic or copper, discreetly tucked along a wall's inner lining. It may pass through a filtration layer linen cloth, crushed charcoal, fine gravel. Not because people were germaphobes they didn't know about bacteria, but because water that looked clean and tasted good was associated with spiritual purity. Cloudy water. Suspicious. Clear water. Blessed. The pipe bends horizontally, feeding into a basin perhaps in the kitchen for cooking, or into the washroom for cleaning, or into a small hand-washing station near the entryway. Some homes even had foot-washing basins built into the floor, a gentle slope, a tiny drain, and a convenient pitcher shelf nearby. And that drain, it didn't just drop into the ground. It connected to yet another gently sloped ceramic pipe, joining a sub-house system of gray water routing. Leftover rinse water might flow out to a garden, or into a city drain channel, or be reused in a courtyard for sweeping dust. Nothing was wasted. Even the used water had a purpose. And here's your quirky twist: some rooftop tanks had rudimentary overflow alarms. No, not buzzers or bells. We're talking about whistling spouts. As water neared the top of a cistern, the angle and pressure would push air through a shaped vent, creating a high-pitched whistle. A servant below would hear it and stop the water flow, often by closing a spigot or removing a diverting plug from the aqueduct line. Plumbing plus acoustics. Low-tech brilliance. You continue wandering through the city and notice how water seems to appear just where it's needed. A basin here. A shaded fountain there. Behind every convenience, an unseen network hums wheels, slopes, valves, bricks. Many hands guiding that one drop from river to rooftop to rinse bowl. And this system wasn't just functional, it was respected. Water was sacred. To spill it, to waste it, to hoard it. That was a moral issue. Religious scholars debated how long water could sit in a cistern before it needed to be refreshed. Some advised stirring water daily to keep its soul awake. A charming idea, if not particularly scientific. But then again, science wasn't separate from belief back then. Engineers prayed before laying pipes. Builders aligned aqueducts with Qibla. Even toilets were positioned with respect to spiritual direction. Yes, really? And all of it depended on one thing: flow. Smooth, silent, reliable. That single drop of water you followed, it traveled kilometers, moved through clay, danced with gravity. It passed sables, filled tanks, cleaned hands, and left without fanfare. A miracle, not of magic, but of math, not of machinery, but of mindfulness. And you, wandering barefoot through these narrow streets, begin to realize something quietly profound in Abbasid Baghdad. Plumbing wasn't a convenience. It was character, a reflection of values, precision, humility, beauty hidden beneath function. And somehow, without a single pump or motor, they made water rise, fall, and return again and again. You step through an arched doorway carved with floral script and soft curves, entering a private, shaded section of a large household. The hush is immediate. There's something different here, quieter, more veiled. You've entered the women's quarters, the harem, not the scandalous fantasy of Western imagination, but the real, lived domestic space where Abbasid women lived, prayed, raised families, and yes, used water. But how do you pipe plumbing into privacy? You walk slowly across cool stone floors, the light filtered through delicate lattice screens. The room smells of rose and saffron. To your left, a marble basin gurgles gently. A woman passes, nodding slightly. She's carrying a small copper pitcher, balanced with casual elegance, filled from a rooftop cistern piped directly to this part of the house. Here's the thing. The history books usually skip Abbasid engineers found clever, quiet ways to deliver water to the most private parts of the home, without disturbing modesty or violating social norms. Because women's spaces weren't just an afterthought. They were designed for sometimes by women, and that meant plumbing had to work invisibly. Pipes were often embedded within walls, leading to secluded washing areas, modest latrines, and discreet ablution basins. And most intriguingly, some of these spaces had water delivery systems that allowed for total separation from the male-run parts of the house. How rooftop tanks with separate downspouts, hidden ceramic channels behind partition walls. In some high-status homes, female attendants managed small-scale plumbing from inside the harem itself, refilling basins, adjusting flow plugs, and maintaining filters made of crushed coral and fine cloth. Historians still argue whether these water rights, yes, rights were legally protected for women or simply culturally respected. Some court records show inheritance cases where daughters demanded access to rooftop cisterns as part of their share. Others suggest that certain dowries included a right to fresh water clause. Romantic, maybe, but also deeply practical. And here's your quirky twist for tonight in some elite homes. Women were said to wear perfumed water stones, porous beads soaked in rose water tied into their belts. Why? To add fragrance during the warmer months, and to signal when the water supply in the cistern was running low. The scent would fade faster. That's right, a wearable plumbing gauge. You pass a private washing room, small, domed, quiet. A low marble bench runs along one wall. In front of it, a recessed foot washing basin, delicately tiled, sloped just enough to carry water away without splashing. A tiny silver drain in the shape of a lotus blossom. It's subtle, intentional. You realize even here, behind layers of privacy, the flow continues. Above, you hear the faint creak of a pulley. A servant is drawing water from the rooftop tank. But she's not shouting. No orders barked across the courtyard. A silent signal, perhaps a scarf draped from a balcony, tells her when to refill, when to stop. And the tank itself replenished every few days from the main canal, often at night when the streets are empty. And all this isn't just convenience, it's spiritual infrastructure. In Islam, ritual washing wudu is required before prayer. That means 5 times a day. Water must be available, clean, and nearby. For women secluded in the home, this couldn't be left to chance. So the architecture responded separate wash stations, indoor fountains, and plumbing layouts that allowed access without exposure. And don't assume the harem was just quiet contemplation. Many women in the Abbasid court were highly educated: poets, mathematicians, doctors. Some of the earliest writings on health, hygiene, and female anatomy come from women in these very spaces. They didn't just use the plumbing, they improved it. There's a story about a female scholar, Zainab al-Ash'ariyah, who proposed a redesign of her household cistern system after observing sediment buildup in the lower basins. She suggested a dual filter method: coarse gravel at the intake, fine cloth near the outlet. Was it implemented? No surviving blueprints to confirm, but several homes in the region show exactly that layout within the century. Coincidence? You walk through a narrow hallway, light shifting through lattice screens, and come to a courtyard fountain. It burbles softly, not to impress, but to cool the air, to offer sound, to gently remind the inhabitants of flow, calm, and grace. And the water routed beneath the courtyard floor, back to the garden. Nothing wasted. Everything recirculated. This is what Abbasid plumbing really was: not just function, but harmony. A balance between the seen and the unseen. Pipes behind walls, water under floors, modesty and engineering working in tandem to serve daily life without spectacle. And it worked. It worked so well, in fact, that centuries later, travelers from Europe would write in awe about how women in Baghdad appeared clean and fragrant always, with no mention of the infrastructure that made that possible, as if it happened by magic, as if the water just knew where to go. But you know now, you've seen the hidden spouts, the whispering drains, the rooftop signals, and you followed the flow into the quietest corners of the Abbasid world, where even the most private rooms hummed with the soundless marvel of ancient plumbing. You exit the hush of the women's quarters and step into a livelier part of the city, steam rising ahead, laughter echoing through archways, the slap of sandals against wet stone. You've arrived at one of Baghdad's public hammams, and it's not even noon, but it's packed. Scholars, merchants, a few off-duty guards lounging with towels slung around their shoulders, all basking in the therapeutic heat of the bathhouse. But you're not just here to sweat. You're here to uncover one of the Abbasid world's most underestimated genius moves using taxes. Yes, taxes to manage water, fund hygiene, and support one of the most iconic public spaces in medieval Islamic life. You pay your entry fee modest, symbolic really, and pass into the steamy antechamber. A friendly attendant offers you a cup of cool water. Another brings a bundle of palm fiber and a small clay bowl. And yes, these people are professionals. This is a bathhouse, but it runs with the precision of a clinic and the chatter of a salon. Now here's the surprising truth: these public bathhouses were not just for cleaning your body. They were community centers. You soaked, you scrubbed, you caught up on politics, poetry, trade news, and more often than not, a few unverified rumors about someone's cousin's neighbor's second wife. Think of it as Baghdad's version of Reddit, but with steam and slightly more modesty. But all of this water, attendance, wood for heating, drainage systems, towel washing cost money. So how did the Abbasids make it work? Enter the hot water tax. That's right. In some districts, water drawn from public canals specifically for hammams was subject to a small levy. Not on the bathers, but on the operators. It was effectively a use tax for heat-processed water. And it worked like a charm. Hammams stayed funded, maintained, and most importantly, clean. Historians still argue whether this tax was enforced empire-wide or just in major cities like Baghdad, Samarra, or Basra. Some documents suggest it varied by district. Others argue it was more of a licensing system with water access limits. But regardless, The result was the same. The water flowed, the doors stayed open, and the hammams became one of the most socially inclusive institutions in Abbasid life. And they weren't just social, they were public health centers before public health was even a phrase. Many hammams had posted schedules separating men's and women's hours. Some employed herbalists who prepared steam infusions, eucalyptus for coughs, chamomile for sore joints. And yes, there were even steam masseuses called daylaks who could snap your spine back into place while reciting poetry. You step into the main chamber now. It's foggy, but the design is deliberate. Vents in the ceiling pull just enough air to keep it breathable. The floors slope perfectly toward drains hidden beneath marble tiles. You don't hear water gurgling. You hear it sighing. Because silence was part of the luxury. You sit beside an old man who immediately launches into a dramatic retelling of a tax dispute between two rival hammam owners. Apparently, one accused the other of siphoning extra canal water through a hidden pipe. Scandalous stuff. City officials were called. Someone's son-in-law got involved. A judge had to determine the proper slope of the pipe by rolling a copper bead through it. If it moved too fast, illegal siphoning. Too slow. Poor engineering. And your quirky Trivia 1 hammam reportedly offered a loyalty program, 10 baths, 1 free scrub. Not an official record, of course, but mentioned in the diary of a traveling merchant who admitted he kept going back for the tea. Not the tubs. Another local innovation. The bathhouse coin, minted specially in some cities to be used only in hammams. Why? Because paper money couldn't survive the steam, and nobody wanted sweaty dinars clinking into the hot pools. So they created simple brass tokens, light, durable, functional, lost to time. But the idea was again brilliantly practical. You lean back now, letting the steam rise around your shoulders. In the corners, workers discreetly sweep water towards central drains. No shouting, no chaos. The flow of water, people, and conversation is seamless, almost sacred, because for all its logistical complexity, the hammam was also spiritual. Ritual cleanliness before prayer. The symbolism of washing away sins. A space where even the poorest man could feel equal to a prince for an hour at least. Until someone challenged him to a poetry duel in the cooling room. As you rise to leave, you pass the tepidarium, the warm transition room, where bathers recline on cushions, sipping sweet drinks and watching the light shift through geometric skylights. This is where gossip thickens, where alliances form, where someone's cousin's neighbor might learn he's now married to someone else's cousin's cousin. And then you pass a large, locked cabinet near the entrance. Curious, that's where the operator keeps the wood tally. Hammams were major fuel consumers. Efficient operation wasn't just about water, it was about firewood. And that meant logs were counted, rationed, taxed, and restocked like grain. Some bathhouses even tracked water usage per degree of temperature. You think your gym's sauna is fancy? Please. You step back into the sun, skin still damp, feeling lighter, cleaner, and maybe a little smug. Because now you know Abbasid bathhouses weren't just luxurious. They were logistical masterpieces funded by taxes, managed like micro-cities, and designed to serve both body and soul. So the next time you complain about your water bill, just remember 200 years ago, someone in Baghdad paid a hot water tax. So you could hear the latest scandal while sitting in a marble tub that drained itself. The hammam fades behind you as you stroll into a quieter corner of the city, an alley shaded by tall brick walls. Hushed and cool despite the heat radiating just beyond. There's no bustle here, no chatter, only the occasional echo of footsteps on stone and... Wait, that sound. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost melodic. You follow it to a recessed alcove, where a narrow stream of water slides along a marble trough, curves gently around a bend, and disappears into a perfectly cut drain without a splash, without a gurgle. The air smells faintly of limescale and old plaster. Welcome to the Abbasid art of quiet plumbing, an engineering aesthetic so refined. It prioritized silence as a form of status. Because here's the secret: if your house sounded like it had water, it meant your plumbing wasn't working right. You step into a home, a modest one, middle class by the era's standards, and it's clear that every wall, every groove in the floor, every curved lip along a basin has been placed not just for function, but for elegant silence. Let's talk design. These homes weren't shouting their success with fountains in the foyer. Instead, they whispered it. Curved basins, often scalloped, were designed to cradle water, not let it slap and echo. Pipes were buried deeper or wrapped in padding to muffle flow. Wastewater was directed through gradual slopes so it never had the chance to burble or surge. And drains. They were positioned in corners, not center stage, hidden beneath brass grates shaped like vines or stars. Form met function, and then took it to dinner. Historians still argue whether this style of damp silence was purely about comfort, or if it carried symbolic weight. One theory suggests the quieter your home's plumbing, the more spiritually in tune you were with nature's rhythms. Another argues it was about modesty after all. Nobody wants the neighbors hearing every detail of your hygiene routine. Either way, the evidence is in the architecture. Archaeologists have uncovered homes where entire corridors were built with slightly convex floors, not enough to trip on, but enough to nudge water quietly toward discreet exits. Some used waxed stone to reduce splash. Others built drain curves so subtle they doubled as decorative grooves in the tile. And here's your quirky discovery of the night: some wealthier households employed listeners, servants trained to walk the property and report on any unusual sounds. A gurgling pipe, a whistling spout that wasn't just a plumbing issue, that was a reputation problem. If your walls murmured, you were slipping. One tale tells of a merchant who, upon hearing a faint plink in the night, had 3 sections of his courtyard torn up to investigate a hairline crack in the overflow basin. It turned out to be a fig seed caught in a tile groove. He still installed an upgraded silencer ring just in case. You pass through a narrow hall and into a washroom tiled in soft sea green. The room is symmetrical, the stone polished smooth, and there's not a single harsh corner. Every edge is rounded, every faucet shielded by a decorative lip. And in the center, a domed ceiling channels condensation into a nearly invisible spout. Drips never hit the floor. They trickle into silence. This wasn't just luxury. It was discipline, a kind of audio etiquette encoded in the very walls. Just like there are dress codes and social cues, there were sound expectations, too. A refined home didn't splash. It flowed, it glided, and it wasn't limited to homes. Some mosques incorporated silent ablution fountains using angled stone channels to dampen flow. The House of Wisdom, a center of Abbasid learning, had reading chambers equipped with hand-washing stations designed to drain without a trace. Scholars believe that noisy water disrupted thought, so engineers responded accordingly. And here's the paradox: the quieter these systems became, the more complex they had to be. More curves, more calibration, more custom-fitted pipes and channel linings. Some craftsmen became known specifically for their ability to tune water features, less plumber, more acoustic artist. In fact, one famous story tells of a caliph commissioning a fountain that made no sound at all. It was said to consist of 5 tiers, each slowing the water's descent until it fell as silently as silk. Was it real? Maybe? Probably not. But the idea caught on. Silence became luxury. Plumbing became art. Even today, remnants of these designs linger. Drain tiles from the 9th century Baghdad show where patterns so consistent so smoothly worn that engineers now study them to understand long-term flow behavior. Not for modern plumbing. Oh no. For noise control in hospitals and hotels? That's how timeless these ideas were. As you exit the home and return to the alley, you hear it again, that soft trickle, barely perceptible, gliding past your ankles in a shallow trough. You notice now how even the public drains are designed to flow quietly, angled just so, shielded by stone lips. Water passes through this city like a guest at a formal banquet welcome. Essential, but never disruptive. So next time you hear a modern bathroom echo like a subway tunnel, think back to this. Think of a city that made water move like music and made silence the highest sound of all. You're now inside the courtyard of an Abbasid scholar's home, not a caliph, not a merchant, but someone who deals in the alchemy of thought scrolls, ink, diagrams, and strangely enough, sewage. That's right, because here in Baghdad, in the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, even the most pious scholars weren't above investigating what went down the drain. And what they discovered, that the human nose was a far more complicated and useful instrument than anyone realized. Welcome to the odd intersection of early science, sanitation, and the war against bad smells. You step inside a modest study, its walls stacked high with texts, Aristotle, Galen, Indian Ayurvedic manuscripts, Persian treatises, and in the middle of it all, a small copper vessel containing something pungent. The scholar leans over it, nodding seriously, and scribbles notes on parchment. Because this isn't a prank, it's an olfactory experiment. In Abbasid Baghdad, smell wasn't just a sign of cleanliness, it was data. The nose was seen as a diagnostic tool, and the air around toilets, drains, and baths became a source of scientific curiosity. What caused foul odors? Could they carry disease? Was it possible to purify air using geometry? Historians still argue whether Abbasid scholars truly understood germ theory. Spoiler. Probably not. But they did suspect that something dangerous lingered in bad air. They called it miasma, and they took it seriously. So seriously, in fact, that Al-Kindi, a polymath known for his work on music, medicine, and mathematics, wrote extensively about how to counteract foul smells in domestic spaces. His solution, a combination of ventilation, angled flow, and aromatic oils placed in strategic drain points. You crouch near one such point in the corner of a tiled latrine, a faint floral scent rises up, masking anything less pleasant. That's not a candle, that's science. Behind the wall, a ventilation shaft leads up and out through the discreet rooftop vent, topped with a carved terracotta cap to keep out rain and birds, but shaped in such a way that wind naturally draws air upward. It's essentially a passive air purifier centuries before Dyson made it chic. One of the fringe yet fascinating studies from this period, scholars attempting to classify smells. They created scent vocabularies, rating odors on scales of strength, pungency, duration, and even texture. Yes, texture. Some described bad smells as sticky, cold, or slimy. The idea was to treat scent like music, a series of notes, harmonies, and dissonances in the air. One cheeky report from a student at the House of Wisdom describes a failed attempt to trap the smell of fresh bread and transfer it to a perfumed oil. Noble cause. Tragic result. The note ends with, "And then the jar exploded." But this wasn't all academic. Engineers took these ideas seriously. Many latrines and sewer outlets were designed with scent traps, small pools of water or oil, that acted as barriers between the house and the outside waste tunnel. If the pipe dried out, the smell crept in. If the trap held, the home stayed fresh. You peer into a diagram of a multi-drain bathhouse layout. There are curves, vents, small pits for ash or incense beneath the walls. This isn't just plumbing, it's aromatherapy meets architectural acoustics. A quiet, scent-controlled flow of water and air designed to comfort the soul while preventing headaches and nausea. And the scholarly debates? Oh, they went deep. Some argued that the ideal drain was shaped like a spiral to slow down airflow and keep smells trapped. Others preferred bell-shaped chambers beneath the basin, filled with rose water to sweeten the passage of waste. A few purists insisted that only rainwater should be used in toilets, because it smelled cleaner than canal water. There were even minor scandals when bathhouses used untreated water during peak hours. Public outcry ensued. Smell was serious. Here's your quirky twist for the night. One scholar, working late into the evening, tried to mathematically define stink using ratios of airspeed, pipe diameter, and moisture levels. Did it work? No. But he did invent an early method for calculating air pressure in vertical shafts, later used by architects to improve natural ventilation in tall buildings. You walk back into the courtyard and notice a small copper bell hanging above a drain. It's not a chime. It's a smell alarm. If too much gas builds up in the shaft, it lifts a small stopper and rings faintly. Just loud enough for someone nearby to check the water trap. Yes, the Abbasids had bathroom alerts before smart homes ever existed. And that's the beauty of it all. Abbasid science wasn't limited to stars and philosophy. It went down into the drains, asked uncomfortable questions, and demanded elegant answers. They didn't just want to flush. They wanted to do it quietly, fragrantly, and with dignity. So next time someone lights a scented candle in a bathroom, just know they're participating in a centuries-old tradition. One that includes scholars, mathematicians, and brave souls willing to write down exactly what they thought spoiled fish smelled like under ideal humidity conditions. In Abbasid Baghdad, even your nose got a seat at the table of science. You leave the serenity of scrolls and scent traps behind and step into the heavy stillness of a history's turning point. The light shifts. The air feels different, charged, tense. You're still in Baghdad, but something has changed. The year is 1258, and the water has stopped flowing. This is the story of how, in a matter of days, the elegant hum of Abbasid plumbing fell into muck and silence, buried under ash, rubble, and blood, because the Mongols have arrived, and with them, the slow, graceful engineering of the civilization is about to be trampled under horses' hooves and siege engines. The Tigris, once a lifeline, runs black with ink from the House of Wisdom. Pipes that once carried clean water now carry nothing but dust. You're in a narrow corridor near a hammam well. What used to be one. The roof is caved in. The tile cracked. A drain lies exposed like a rib cage, twisted and dry. And you can still smell it faintly, the ghost of jasmine oil and cedar clinging beneath the char. Because when the Mongols sacked Baghdad, they didn't just destroy libraries and palaces, they ripped out the infrastructure. Clay pipes shattered. Aqueducts collapsed. Water wheels, those rhythmic lifters of life, were torched or left to rot. Historians still argue whether the plumbing system was deliberately targeted or simply collateral damage. Some claim Mongol forces flooded certain districts to breach defenses, damming canals until walls burst. Others believe the destruction was too complete to be accidental, that they understood, however crudely, that taking Baghdad's water was the same as taking its soul. The city's silence wasn't just from fear. It was the silence of stopped drains, broken fountains, and water trapped where it didn't belong. The sewers designed to carry waste away quietly backed up. Streets flooded. Disease spread. The delicate rhythm of wash, rinse, flow gone. And here's the disturbing twist. Some of the very same tunnels that once carried waste to garden compost pits were repurposed by survivors to hide books. Scholars buried manuscripts in cisterns. Engineers sealed drawings in hollowed pipes. Not to protect sewage, but to save knowledge. One small, heartbreaking detail, a child's scribbled water diagram, found centuries later, stuffed into a soap jar beneath a bathhouse ruin. A sketch of a pipe, labeled in shaky Arabic. A small arrow. A note that reads, "Here the water turns." The Mongols didn't care about slope ratios or perfumed latrines. They were after dominance, not design. But in their destruction, they revealed how interdependent Baghdad had become. Without clean water, the scholars fell sick. Without functioning hammams, public health collapsed. Without irrigation, gardens wilted. Civilization didn't crumble in a flash. It sogged. You stand now in the wreckage of a wealthy home. One wall remains, with a glazed drain tile still clinging to the plaster. The pipe it once fed is shattered. Bits of ceramic lie in a fan across the rubble. You imagine the last moments here, someone grabbing water. Maybe to drink, maybe to defend, maybe just to clean a wound. And then nothing. But not all was lost. In the chaos, a few engineers survived. Some fled to Cairo, others scattered east, and with them, they carried knowledge how to bend pipes without cracking them, how to filter gray water using layered ash, how to slope a latrine floor so perfectly that water obeys silently. There's even a legend about one engineer who, years after the fall, rebuilt a bathhouse in a small Syrian town using only memory. No blueprints, just tactile recall how smooth the tiles felt, how quickly water drained, how soft the echo when poured right. One surviving record describes a clandestine repair effort townspeople restoring a ruined hammam in secret, using bits of recovered pipe. Not for luxury, for healing. They believed that bathing could restore the soul of the city, and they weren't wrong. Because plumbing isn't just about pipes, it's about trust. Trust that the water will come, that it will go, that it will be clean, quiet, kind. Without that trust, cities break. And so, when Baghdad's water stopped moving, so did its rhythm. But even in collapse, the legacy endured. Later Islamic cities Damascus, Cairo, Fez would borrow, adapt, and evolve Abbasid techniques. The slope, the silence, the scented basin, all would rise again. And even centuries later, when Europeans began plumbing their palaces with great fanfare, many of their ideas traced quietly back to Baghdad's buried systems. Not directly, not with credit, but with echoes. So tonight, as you walk through these ruins, listen carefully. The drains may be dry, the basins cracked, but if you close your eyes, you can still hear a faint trickle, a curve of water, a sigh through stone. A civilization that made cleanliness sacred, that studied scent like music, that whispered with its walls. A plumbing system that didn't just serve life, it reflected it. The sun is rising now, casting gold and peach across the crumbled skyline. Baghdad is quieter than you've ever heard it, quieter even than the deepest tunnels. But time, like water, has a way of flowing forward. And what was lost beneath the rubble didn't vanish entirely, it simply waited. You walk through the remains of the Abbasid capital, past silent fountains, past cracked aqueducts, and arrive at a courtyard where a group of European travelers has gathered. The year is the 15th century, and what you're witnessing now is something subtle. Almost ironic, Europe rediscovering what Baghdad once perfected. A monk in a rough wool robe points toward a broken drain cover. He's taking notes, measuring angles, sketching tile patterns, marveling at how the slope still holds. Beside him, a Venetian merchant is poking at a ceramic pipe segment with a stick, mumbling about ingenious Eastern engineering. They don't know it yet, but they're laying the groundwork for what Europe will one day call a sanitary revolution. Indoor toilets, public water systems, waste removal infrastructure, all that future glory. Right now, it's a scavenger hunt led by men who are wide-eyed and more than a little baffled. Historians still argue whether Europe borrowed Abbasid water technology consciously or simply reinvented it under different names. Some claim the connection is direct via translated Arabic manuscripts, trade, and returning crusaders who'd experienced the luxuries of the East. Others argue it was more of a cultural osmosis ideas drifting westward with travelers, merchants, and wandering clerics who'd seen a basin that drained without a splash and couldn't forget it. Either way, the truth is undeniable. The Abbasids were centuries ahead. You pause near a European traveler sketching a bathroom with separate water inlets and outlets. He thinks he's designing a novelty for an Italian noble's villa. He has no idea a nearly identical system once graced a merchant's house here in Baghdad, complete with an overflow channel, a scent basin, and a vented ceiling to prevent condensation drips. Your quirky twist for this final leg. In the 1600s, when Englishman Sir John Harrington invented what's considered the first modern flush toilet, his design included a tilted basin, a hidden cistern, and a gravity-fed pipe with a flow delay. Sound familiar? And even as London struggled with chamber pots and night soil men, long after Rome's aqueducts had crumbled into ruin, the concept of thoughtful, dignified plumbing had already been proven in stone, clay, and silenced by the Abbasids. But what's more fascinating than the technology is the mindset. The Abbasids believed that water was not simply a utility, it was sacred. Its movement, its cleansing, its quietness. These weren't just engineering challenges, they were moral ones. A good home didn't just hide its waste, it managed it with grace. A well-designed toilet didn't merely flush, it honored modesty. A public bath didn't just offer hygiene, it offered sanctuary. These values aren't measured in meters of clay pipe. They're measured in intention. And maybe that's the part Europe struggled to replicate. You stand now at the edge of the Tigris once again. The river rolls on less grand than before, perhaps but eternal. Beneath your feet lie tunnels, drains, and chambers lost to time. But if you dig carefully, respectfully, you'll still find them: the elegant curves, the glazed tiles, the soft slope of water's perfect path. Because Baghdad didn't just create indoor plumbing, it refined it. It whispered it. It turned it into something nearly invisible but unforgettable. And now, centuries later, as modern cities face climate crises, sanitation shortages, and crumbling infrastructure, you can't help but wonder, maybe it's time we look backward, not for nostalgia, but for inspiration. To remember a time when water flowed like poetry, when drains were shaped like lilies, and when the cleanest parts of life were also the most beautifully designed. You turn away, leaving the river behind, the sound of flowing water echoing only in memory. But you'll never unhear it, that soft trickle beneath the tiles, that invisible genius humming under every courtyard. Because once you've heard Abbasid plumbing, everything else just sounds loud. And now, as the final trickles fade and the pipes fall silent, let's ease back into stillness. You've wandered through tunnels no longer seen, felt the cool press of marble beneath bare feet, followed water as it moved with purpose and poetry through a city built on flow. Let all of that go now. Let the hiss of steam from the hammam dissolve into quiet fog. Let the soundless pour of a rooftop cistern drift into a dream. The clink of copper pitchers, the soft whisper of sandals on damp stone. Gone now, too. Even the arguments of scholars over curved drains and scent traps have softened, like echoes fading into ancient plaster. You're no longer walking through Baghdad. You're floating above it gently, quietly watching 1,000 tiny pipes carry comfort, dignity, and cleanliness to people who never thought to boast about it. They didn't need to. Their homes simply worked. And your breath, slow now, follows the rhythm they perfected. In, like fresh rain filling a rooftop tank. Out, like clean water flowing gently beneath a garden wall. In, cool air, heavy with rose and lime. Out, stillness, peace, and sleep. Tonight, there's no need for dreams. You've already wandered through a masterpiece. A system built not to dazzle, but to serve, to hum, to whisper, to flow. So rest now. Let silence be your infrastructure. Good night.